Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. I do apologise for the stuttery intro music. I'm still trying to get on top of that. I don't know what the problem is there and why it should be so. But anyway, here we are. It's show number 346. It's Wednesday the 28th of June, and right now it is a pretty cloudy day outside. 20 degrees, so not cold, but not particularly exciting either. And tomorrow looks like a bit damp down here in London. I gather it's raining in other parts of the UK, so probably not a great day for riding if you're under the cloud. So what have we got for you in today's show? Well, we have a sad story about a British tourist who has reportedly fallen 1,600 feet into a gorge in the Himalayas on a group ride. The Highways Agency, Highways England or whatever they're called now, they finally admitted that the risk of death in a stopped vehicle on a smart motorway is higher than it is if you have to stop on a conventional motorway. The IAM tells government that bikes are cleaner and reduce traffic congestion, but is that really the truth? We'll have a look at that story. A world speed record has been smashed on a shed-built bike powered by steam. And Triumph's 400 singles have finally appeared. We'll have a quick look at those. I'll look at them in more detail in the next show because we have a couple of long discussions today, including the final one, which is all about the problem 50 years on from the classic Think Once, Think Twice ride bike safety movie, which said he's hard to see but he's dead easy to hurt. We're still having exactly the same crashes, and we'll have a look at that and a court case where that very line was used by the judge. So settle yourselves down for the next 30 minutes or so whilst I run through today's stories. Now, I had hoped to round out tonight's show, or today's show, with some photos that I was planning on taking at the Cassington Bike Night on Monday, but sadly the camera stayed unused because I never actually made it out of central London. Now, I set off around 12 noon. The plan was to meet with my brother on the far side of Reading, go for a ride round the Berkshire Downs for a couple of hours, then meet a buddy in Oxford, pick him up and then head on to the bike night. Excellent plan and all that, right up until the point where I detected the telltale signs of a deflating front tyre. Now, fortunately, I was only about 10 or 12 minutes from home, and I was just actually approaching the filling station where I was planning on topping up. So I just simply rode into the forecourt, did a U-turn and came out again. But by the time I did get home, the front tyre was nearly completely flat and I was riding at walking pace, so I obviously wasn't going anywhere. Now, I'm not sure why it went down. I did have a good look at the tread. I popped the bike up on a jack, spun the front wheel round. I couldn't see any telltale nails, screws, bits of wire or metal poking into the tread. So I have pumped it up again and I'm monitoring the pressure. And right now it does seem to be staying up. So possibly it's some dirt got into the valve. I did pump the tyres up about 10 days ago for the MOT, so that's possibly what it is. But anyway, it's all reminded me, of course, that I do actually have a tyre pressure monitoring system for the bike, which I took off when I changed the tyres last and never did put back on again. And because I managed to displace the two little sensors, I found them again during a sort of a draw clear out this winter, so I must get those back on again. Maybe I can do a review of that actually at some point because it is quite a useful little system. Anyway, on with the news. Now, what have I got for you today? Well, unfortunately there are reports that a British tourist has died after his motorcycle apparently plunged 1,600 feet, that's something approaching 450 metres I think, off the edge of a cliff into a gorge in India. Now, British government officials had not confirmed the incident as of yesterday, but it's reported that the unnamed rider was on a road trip as part of an 8-man motorcycle tour to the Himalayas. The incident happened in the state of Himachal Pradesh, which is the northernmost state of India, when the rider apparently lost control of the bike and veered off the road after hitting a stone. Now, a member of the search and rescue rescue team has told Indian newspapers that the rescuers and members of the local police force descended from the cliffs into the gorge and they have extracted a body. So, sad story there. The second story in the news, which has been going the rounds for quite some time now, concerns smart motorways. Now, excuse me, despite repeated claims that overall, in terms of serious and fatal casualties, smart motorways are our safest roads, we've known really for quite a while that the technology being built into these roads, excuse me, I'll just clear my throat there. The technology hasn't been performing as it was claimed it would. Now, amongst the issues, there was a performance evaluation of the stopped vehicle detection systems. Now, this evaluation was passed, but it turned out only due to errors in the analysis of the data. And when the report came out which corrected those errors, the conclusion was that the evaluation would actually have been failed. Now, that was back in 2021, that evaluation, and it looked at a 2015 test of the stopped vehicle detection systems on an 8-mile stretch of the M25 over 6 days, and it found that the analysis that was published by Highways England was incorrect. The stopped vehicle detection system identified 192 stationary vehicle events during the review period, and their claim was that that meant it passed the required detection rate of 80%, which safety experts actually suggest is already far too low. But when the CCTV was analysed, they found well over 100 other vehicles had also been stopped in live running lanes during that 6-day period, which meant that the system only actually managed to identify 65% of stopped vehicles, which is well below that 80% target that should have been achieved, and so the assessment should have failed the evaluation. Now, okay, so that's one example of the problems. In November last year, it was revealed that the target time for responding to a stranded vehicle on these smart motorways had only been met more than a year after it was originally targeted. Now, the National Highways had initially committed to reducing its average response team from a truly scary 17 minutes back in 2020 to a barely less worrying 10 minutes by July 2021. But analysis of the data shows that they only managed to get to that target by September 2022. We also know that they have had blackouts in control rooms where there are cameras not working. There are any number of problems with this scheme. The bays that you can see, the refuges, are too far apart. They're not where they were originally designed to be due to construction difficulties and expenses and so on. But the latest story that broke in the Telegraph this week was in response to comments from a coroner about the death of a man on the smart motorway. Now, apparently, the story goes that the Director of Road Safety, Sheena Haig, is said to have written this, quote, "The risk of a collision between a moving and a stopped vehicle is greater on all lane running and dynamic hard shoulder motorways than on other motorway types. But the risk of a collision involving only moving vehicles is lower." Well, the risk of a collision and the risk of serious injury or death due to a stopped vehicle collision is lowest on conventional or controlled motorways. So think about that for a moment. Basically what she's saying is that if you break down on one of these smart motorways, you are more likely to be killed than if you break down on a conventional motorway. And that's not entirely surprising, because the majority of vehicles that do break down on running motorways where there's a hard shoulder will be able to reach the hard shoulder. We've known for a long time that if you do stop in the live running lane on a conventional motorway, there have been fatalities when cars have been hit by other vehicles. So the problem with the smart motorway, of course, is there is no way of getting off unless you manage to roll to one of these bays, which are placed far too far apart. So that letter was apparently, that statement was a response to a letter written in April by Anne Pember. She's the senior coroner for Northamptonshire. She wrote to National Highways, warning that all-lane running motorways means there's nowhere to park safely if there's a breakdown. Well, yes, okay, but we've known that for years. That was the original complaint about them. It was a statement even in design stage, but it's been ignored. But National Highways continue to roll out the line that the quote latest published data shows that overall, in terms of serious or fatal casualties, smart motorways are our safest roads. Well, including the serious injuries, I think in there is probably a bit of a red herring, because if you are sat in a stationary car and you are hit from behind by a truck doing 60 miles per hour, your chances of being seriously injured are pretty darn low. Whereas if you're doing 60 miles an hour and you are knocked sideways by another vehicle and you spin out of control, which is a sort of fairly typical crash on a motorway, you've probably got a better chance of surviving that one. So, put it all together, these failings, these faulty data, they've undoubtedly been a major contributor to the, quote, lack of public confidence, which has resulted in the government, of course, cancelling the rollout of hundreds of miles of new smart motorways. So thanks for Paul Varnsbury to alerting me to that latest statement about the fatality rates on among broken down vehicle drivers. Quite interesting, that. Right, okay, moving on. Neil Gregg, the Director of Policy and Research at IAM RoadSmart, he said last week that, frustratingly, motorcycles have quite simply been ignored in the government's plans to alleviate the impacts of increased traffic congestion. Now, IAM RoadSmart believe that powered two-wheelers could play an important role in addressing concerns around air quality, and they say that's particularly important in the short term as fossil fueled vehicles are phased out. I don't quite get that, because if you're phasing out fossil fueled vehicles, then you will get an increase in air quality. So precisely how motorcycles are a benefit there, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, the issue was raised on the 21st of June at the Motorcycle Sector Ministerial Round Table. Now, so why would the government ignore the supposed benefits of bikes? Well, they carried out a survey, this is the IM, to find out how motorcyclists are seen by drivers when it comes to the questions of air quality and traffic flow. And what was the answer? Well, the interesting thing is that the results probably weren't exactly what the IAM were hoping for. The IAM suggests this means that it's because drivers aren't well educated about what benefits motorcycling brings, but they looked at 2,000 motorists plus, and they asked two questions. Do motorcycles improve air quality? And the answer that they got was that, in fact, just 22%, barely 1 in 5, believed that motorcycles do improve air quality. They secondly asked, did motorcycles have a positive contribution to play in terms of reducing traffic congestion? And although rather more of the respondents did recognise that motorcycles do ease the flow of their vehicles generally, it was still more than half the majority of those surveyed, 58%, basically 6 out of 10, indicated they didn't think motorcycles had a positive contribution to play in that role either. Now, when promoting motorcycles as a viable form of transport, it really is an issue, because basically if that's what the voters believe, that's what they'll tell their MPs and their local council representatives. And then we end up with the kind of problems that we can see right now in Hackney, where there seems to actually be some kind of concerted effort to clear powered two-wheelers off their roads. Now, of course, it's not helped by some of the disingenuous statements being made in support of bikes. IAM RoadSmart, for example, they say, strongly believe that motorcycles represent a huge opportunity in combating poor air quality and congested roads. So how does that work? Well, the IAM say their smaller size means that motorcyclists can safely filter through traffic. Safely? Let's see some statistics to prove it. First, what I can tell you from my years of experience of filtering through traffic for work is that many of the near misses I had did happen when filtering. Now, essentially, unless it's done through stationary traffic, it's a form of overtaking with all the risks that overtaking entails. When passing stopped vehicles, when there is rather less risk of the vehicle doing something odd, you get other problems like pedestrians walking through queues. I showed a video of that and talked about it on my Video Nasty series a few months back. Cars will come through queues, and we regularly see motorcycles hitting emerging vehicles that are passing through a queue, and there's cyclists, of course, crossing through queues, and people open doors and they get out of cars. And I've got a broken finger to prove that from the early 80s. So my opinion, filtering is never safe, despite what the IAM tell you, and most of the risks though are predictable. They are manageable if we're not in a rush. But the problem is that many riders have predictable crashes and probably are in a rush, and I only have to note the number of times when I'm driving my car in London that it's my actions that keep riders safe and not the other way around. I shouldn't be inconvenienced by filtering bikers when I'm driving. And secondly, the IAM says smaller engines mean they produce less harmful emissions. Specifically, they say motorcycles actually produce less than half the emissions of cars, or even less in some cases. And as a source, they quote a joint National Motorcyclists Council and Motorcycle Industry Association briefing paper for Parliament called Motorcycling and the Future of Transport, which was published in February 2023. The trouble is, that claim is nonsense, because it depends entirely what you're looking at. Now, the conventional argument is that a motorcycle is more efficient than a car, and as a result, CO2 emissions are down vehicle compared with vehicle. But the trouble is, with this argument, it depends on the relative fuel efficiency of each vehicle. And the Toyota Aygo, for example, just take one popular town car, it offers fuel consumption around 55 mpg. 55 mpg for a Toyota Aygo. Now, as a rough and ready rule, it's only going to be machines of around 47 horsepower, 500 cc's or thereabouts. Maybe the NC750 is an exception, but only those kind of bikes, the relatively smaller machines, which are going to be more fuel efficient than a small petrol engine car. What's Britain's best-selling bike over 125 cc's? It is, of course, BMW's R1250 GS, and you see plenty of people commuting on those bikes. So what's the economy? It delivers around 42 to 46 mpg, according to figures from road tests and from the Fuelly app, where people actually record real-time fuel consumption. So on the move at the same speed, it's almost certain the Aygo does better mpg than the motorcycle, and that means it's almost certain to produce less CO2 than the bike. Of course, the car gets stuck in traffic and continues to idle, so it's usually argued that motorcycles continuing to move are burning less fuel to get somewhere, and that was actually a reasonable argument for older vehicles. But modern cars have to stop. They have a stop-start engine technology, and bikes don't yet, so I would presumably cancel it out. And secondly, if you do see an Aygo on the road, it's likely to be cleaner than the 1250 GS passing past it, and that's because motorcycle emission standards have only just caught up with cars. For example, the best-selling machine over 125 is, we know, the BMW 1250 GS. That only became Euro emission compliant in late 2020 to the Euro 5 standard. The Euro 5 is the same as Euro 6 for cars, and the cut-off date for newly registered Euro 6 cars was 5 years previously, September 2015. And the same lag applies to all the earlier motorcycle emission standards too. So put a car rather than a bike side by side with the same registration plate, it's almost certain that the motorcycle is more polluting. Now, what this means, of course, is that the cars were built cleaner. It's not until 2020 that things level out, and side by side the NOx and the particulate emissions will have evened out. So, third problem, generally speaking, cars tend to drop out of the pool of transport rather more quickly than bikes. Bikes tend to last more years, which means there are probably more older bikes around than cars of the same vintage anyway. And I won't even mention the problem caused by riders who simply remove their entire catalytic converter system because it stifles the performance or the sound. Now, few drivers would bother with that. So what about the second claim, that if there was just a 10% shift to motorcycles, congestion would drop by 40%? Now, as I recall, this fact is based on a single computer model of a single stretch of road in Belgium. Now, it's an encouraging indication of what could be achieved by a big swing to power two-wheelers, but it's not something that should be proposed as a proven benefit, a fact. In fact, I understand that traffic engineers usually assume that motorcycles consume about half the space of a car, but you could carry twice as many people in the car. Whatever happened to ride sharing? Frankly, we don't help our own case when we present arguments like this, which can be so easily dismantled. Right, we've got some comments. Kevin's looked in. Good morning for you, Kevin. He talks about a mandatory 60 or less restriction for all lane running motorways, and he said, would we be happy to see them all scrapped? Okay, so yeah, all right, so where we go. Right, so if you want to see a bike with some emissions, here's an interesting story. Let's just have a quick look at that. Zoom in on it a bit. What are you looking at there? Well, it's not something that's just blown up on the drag strip. You've probably heard of the Mallard, the A4 class steam locomotive, raced down the Stoke Bank famously back in July 1938 and set a new steam locomotive world record of 126 miles per hour, and that still stands today. What you're actually looking at there is, in fact, Graham Sykes, a self-described nutty inventor, using the power of steam to reach a record-breaking, wait for it, 163 miles per hour in just under 4 seconds, a new world land speed record for a steam-powered motorcycle. Now, effectively, he's built a jet bike there. He set the record at Elvington Airfield near York and absolutely smashed the old record, which was just 80 miles per hour in 2014, which was held by Bill Barnes, an American inventor. Now, Mr. Sykes apparently designed the bike in his garden shed in Bedale in North Yorkshire. The bike is called Force of Nature, and it uses hydrogenated vegetable oil to superheat water to create a steam jet from twin nozzles which fire the steam out of the back of the bike, and it took him 10 years to apparently perfect this project. Now, Mr. Sykes said, I've taken the principles of chemistry, married them with precision engineering, and created something I'm passionate about, a fast bike. And he said, I want to do this in a way that's sustainable for the planet and demonstrates you don't have to compromise on speed, you just have to get creative. Well, yes, I'm not entirely sure that the traffic people would be too happy with jet-powered steam bikes trundling up and down the road, but hey-ho. He believes there is more potential to be unleashed from his motor, and he's looking now to achieve 200 miles per hour from a standing start over an eighth of a mile, which is going to be pretty remarkable performance. Right, okay, just a quick reminder. The show goes out every Wednesday and Sunday, almost always live, occasionally recorded, and very, very rarely I miss a show. If you have missed a previous show, or you just want to catch up later, do pop over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget your all-important UK on the end, or you won't find my channel, and you can find them all over there in date order, along with all my other videos, including my Science of Being 60-second science and 60-second safety videos. So, right, okay, moving on. Now, we've been teased with leaks, we've been teased with nicely posed spy shots, we've been told it would all appear in 2014. I'll just lost the photograph I was looking for. There it is. Let me just get that up on screen. The bikes was, as I say, bikes were supposed to appear in 2015. They've been anything from 250 or 300 upwards, but it all went quiet until a year or so ago when we started seeing more spy shots of the bike. But almost 10 years to the day after Triumph confirmed they're working on an entry-level machine, that was back at the 2013 Milan motorcycle show, the baby Triumph is finally with us. And there it is. And it turns out there are actually a pair of them. Now, both machines, the 400 Speed Roadster and the 400 Scrambler, have been designed in coordination, in collaboration with the Indian motorcycle giants Bajaj Auto. Now, production will apparently take place either at Triumph's own Indian and Thai plants, so not going to be built in the UK, and Bajaj will build their own models in India. Now, it's not entirely clear if the latter will be actually badged as Triumphs or Bajaj machines, but anyway, there we go. Why a 400? Well, at the time, I said that the originally announced 250 made little sense. It basically is too big for the Euro learner market. It's too small for the step up from learner bike to the A2 category, where bikes can be up to 47 horsepower. And yeah, whilst 250 would be a popular size for the Indian market, it was clearly already very well catered for by homegrown bikes, and the market for bigger, more aspirational bikes in India and other countries to where India exports was clearly growing rapidly. So I said at the time that a 350 made a lot more sense, and it looks like Triumph actually agreed, because the new machines are in fact based around this new liquid-cooled 398cc single, which puts out a fairly healthy 40 horsepower. Now that is significant because it gives the Triumphs a significant edge over their key rivals Royal Enfield. And they have pretty much made the 350 class their own with their 20-odd horsepower singles. Now, you'll recall the new Royal Enfield model. It was designed in the UK, it's been built in India, and it appeared in 2020, and since then a range of new models have been developed around this 350cc engine, and they've been something of a surprise bestseller here in the UK. Almost 4,000 of the variants were sold across the UK in 2022. Now, it also looks like price will be a key weapon in Triumph's sales tactics. Now, specifically, Triumph say that both the Speed 400 and the Scrambler 400X will be competitively priced in each market. That's there from their press pack. Now, Triumph are no doubt hoping that their significantly more powerful machine will eat into Royal Enfield's sales, but they're presumably also hoping that it will steal away potential buyers who are looking at machines like Honda's Ranger 500s, for example, the Kawasaki 400s, Yamaha's MT 300 base bikes, and even the Chinese models, which are starting to move into this market. Now, since the news of the release of these two machines only broke yesterday afternoon, I'll be having a look at them in a bit more in depth on Sunday, but for now, Triumph say that the pair of bikes will deliver class-leading performance, unrivaled quality, and low running costs combined with unbeatable value for money. And they talk about it being at a low price point initially too. So UK prices, we'll be waiting for those for a while, but I'd say we can have a guess at roughly where they're likely to be priced. The Royal Enfield Meteor, for example, is priced at around 3,800, 3,900, depending on bits and pieces that you add to it. The CB500 Honda, which was pretty much their entry middleweight, it now starts at £6,700. That's gone up quite a bit. BMW's 310 GS, an almost forgotten model, that comes in at just under 6,000 and has relatively low power output. Of the Chinese machines which would compete on price, the Vosges 500 DSX, for example, which we've looked at previously, will set you back about 5,500 at current prices. So if Triumph aim to ensure an incredibly attractive buyer proposition, both in terms of overall value and initial purchase price. My guess that the machine will probably come in somewhere around the 5 mark. Incidentally, the service intervals on the bike are also pretty impressive at 10,000 miles. So we're going to know more when the models launch. They'll be on sale in India from next month, and we will see them here in the UK at the same time as they begin to arrive in other markets, which is going to be the start of 2024. So I'm sure they'll be taking orders for them soon. Right, okay, don't forget, do share the show with your biking buddies, and if you possibly can, do head over to my Coffee page and see if you can support me. £3 over there buys me a cuppa, which keeps the shows flowing to you, and you also get the benefit of access to 1,000 better biking articles too, so you get quite a lot for your money over there. Right, okay, on with the final in-depth point today. Got quite a lot to get through here, but over the last 2 Sundays I've been talking about road safety interventions that are supposed to make riding safer. The sort of to die for style posters aimed at riders and telling us not to take risks, and there are the Think Bike posters aimed at drivers supposedly are raising their awareness of motorcycles. But do these campaigns actually achieve anything? And the answer to this, unfortunately, is not if a recent court case has anything to say for itself. Here's the problem. Christine Clark, 77 years old, was reminded of this 1970s road safety movie with the slogan "Think once, think twice, think bike" by a judge after she pulled out in front of a motorcyclist, one David Wilson, in her Fiat 500 at a road junction after she failed to spot him travelling along the carriageway. Now, Mr. Wilson was riding his Yamaha. As he got to the junction, the prosecution said that she pulled out in front of him, pulled halfway across the road. He tried to take evasive action, crashed into the driver's side door of the Fiat, went over the car, banging his head on the roof. He was left with multiple fractures to his spine, broken ribs and a broken nose. Now, the judge made it clear that the case is not about people deliberately taking risks or deliberately setting out to harm other people, but about making mistakes. He also made it clear that there is no indication either on this day or any other day that the driver had driven in, quote, a poor state. So what caused the crash? The judge said that, in my view, this was a momentary lapse of concentration. Now, if you've been following my work on the science of being seen, and I hope some of you at least have, you'll know that I agree that crashes like this are rarely about deliberate risk-taking. They're rarely about pulling out on a motorcycle as a soft target, things that motorcyclists commonly believe. But I don't believe that the failure to see a motorcycle is much to do with a, quote, lack of concentration either. In fact, the circumstances suggest that the victim actually suffered from a combination of visual perception issues and a workload problem. Now, the judge summed up: you did check when you pulled out and you saw the fire engine. What you did not see, tragically, was the motorcycle in front of it. So let's explain what might have happened based on what we know about the science of visual perception and what happens in situations like this generally. Now, when we look and at something, we have to consider the structure of the eye. Now, the field of view, which gives us our colour vision, is actually focused very tightly. It's only about 5 degrees across. We actually have to look directly at something to see it. And we use this narrow focused foveal zone to examine an object in detail. If you want to examine something else, you have to move your eyes, refocus on the new object of interest. Now, secondly, there is the process of choosing what to observe, and this is highly selective for the very simple reason that the visual system simply doesn't have the processing power to simultaneously bring to our conscious attention every object in the visual field. So we do not process every single piece of information that's available. Instead, the eyes go through a process to select different aspects of the scene to sort of retrieve and process. Our visual system is capable of different levels of retrieval. Now, we can either get a large amount of low level information from a visual scene, such as when we look out from a sort of hillside across a valley and see mountains on the far side of it. We'll take all that in, but what we won't get in that view is any detail. If we want to retrieve specific detail objects, such as the fact there's a sheep on the hillside, we need to focus directly on that using our foveal gauge. So that's how we get high levels of detail. We can get a vague sort of generalized overview of a scene, or we can go for detail. So gaining useful information about moving objects, of course, within the street scene requires us to use that second detail view strategy, where we concentrate on objects, and we have to do it one at a time in order to gather enough information to understand what it is we're actually seeing before we shift to another object. Now, the selection process that uses eye movements to focus on specific parts of the scene that the brain has actually flagged off as interesting is known as overt selection. The movements from location to location are called saccades, and the pauses where we stop to examine that particular part of the scene to retrieve that detailed information, they're known as fixations. Now, here's the problem. The visual images we see in a fixation are clear, they're focused, they give us lots of detail. But when we move our eyes, the image becomes blurry compared with the image that we received during the fixations. The sharp images will dominate over the blurry images. So we only consciously perceive the images when the eye has stopped moving at those fixations, and that mechanism is known as saccadic suppression. The brain kind of does a filling in job and creates a sort of synthetic image as we move from place to place, because if our vision went all blurry, it would be very, very disconcerting. But here's the next question. How do we know what needs examining in detail? Why do we see certain things in a scene and not see others? Well, there are several factors to involve here. Now, detecting moving objects was almost certainly essential for survival in the dim distant past, when sort of the mammalian eye was being developed and the primate brain was being created. So they naturally get higher priority than stationary objects. So we're sensitive to movement, but we are only sensitive to movement across the background. We do not pick up objects that are coming straight towards us very well. We're also sensitive to the appearance, the sudden appearance of a light. But again, we're not very good at detecting a light that's already on and just coming straight out of the background at us. So the fact is that headlights, day riding lights, don't seem to be all that effective. So our search is based on the goal that we want to achieve, the task we're trying to perform. For example, if we're looking for a plane, we wouldn't look down at the ground, we'd look at the sky. We know roughly where we need to look for it. And if we are told that we need to put out onto a street, we'll be looking at the street scene around us. Now, the level of importance of the objects that we're searching for is based on personal experience. So we also learn what needs to be seen, what can be safely ignored. We wouldn't bother with looking at a phone box, for example, because we know it's not going anywhere on that street scene. But we would hopefully become aware of cars, motorcyclists, cyclists, for example, because they're all moving and could potentially be a hazard. So let's try to turn around and look at what the driver might have seen. Now, first of all, from the perspective of the driver, the motorcycle approaching on a straight bit of road is approaching in pretty much a straight line directly towards them. That means there is no lateral movement across the background, so nothing to attract attention. Those day riding lights are also coming straight out the background. Nothing much to help there because they are unchanging too. Secondly, and this is where it starts to get important, if we're riding ahead of a bigger vehicle, so we are here and there is another big vehicle behind us, what are we most likely to see? It's going to be the bigger vehicle. But it's also connected with how often we see those objects on the road. We see 100 cars for every motorcycle. We are going to see cars more often, and we just get used to seeing cars. The motorcycle tends to be out of sight, out of mind. So having seen the vehicle behind the bike, a further visual perception error comes into play. Now, when we track a moving vehicle, we are using something called an eye movement called a smooth pursuit. And what this does is it keeps the object we're actually visually following in clear focus, but everything else around it, partly because it's not moving in exactly the same way as the object we're focusing on, partly because it's in that peripheral vision, it's blurry and it's smeared. So even though the motorcycle's closer, it's in that blurry part of the visual field while we're focused on what's behind the motorcycle, and it makes it more difficult again for us to detect it. And this is why eye contact so often fails. It's a concept that I think is incredibly faulty and shouldn't be taught any longer, but we say we've made eye contact with the driver because the driver appears to be looking in our direction, and the rider assumes they've made eye contact. But what's actually happened is the driver's focused on the car or the bus or whatever is behind you. And you can often actually observe this happening in real life. When you get really quite close to the junction, the driver's head will suddenly snap, and then he'll look directly at you, and then his eyes will actually track you as you go past the front of his car. That was the moment he saw you and not the vehicle behind you. So I would say forget eye contact. It's far too late to take emergency action by the time you actually get it. And thirdly, let's go back to remembering what that vehicle behind the motorcycle was. It was a fire engine. Now, firstly, fire engines are painted up so as to be easy to see. They're also painted up to be recognizable as an emergency service vehicle. And we are taught to pay particular attention to emergency services vehicles. Now, I am speculating here, but I'd put good money on the idea that having spotted the approaching fire engine, awareness of what the vehicle actually was caused the driver to look more than usually intently at it, to double check its speed and its distance, and to judge whether or not it would be safe to pull out in front of the fire truck. And that's what she duly did, with the result we've heard about. Now, this is almost certainly a demonstration of a problem known as inattentional blindness, where we miss something in plain sight because we give a high level of attention to a competing object. Now, sometimes I think we should never actually let scientists make up terms for a phenomenon, because inattentional blindness is nothing to do with being inattentive or being blind. It actually means that we've seen something, but it's our close attention to one object alone within the visual scene that means we don't have the spare attention, as it were, to see other things that are going on around us. So it's nothing to do with not looking properly, as some commentators have said. So to sum up, what happened? Well, almost certainly we know the driver looked in the right direction at the right time towards where the bike was approaching from, but it's almost certain that she looked straight past the bike because her attention was drawn unusually strongly to the fire engine. What can I say about that then? Well, the advice given to the drivers in, of course, that information film was think once, think twice, think bike. It remains good advice, but the crash that happened almost half a century after the original advert, which featured TV actor Edward Judd, something I only discovered the other day actually, it goes on to prove that nothing has changed in the 50 years since the film was made. The Smidsey collision at junctions where drivers failed to spot motorcycles is still the most common crash of all in a built-up area. Things haven't got worse for bikers. When things go wrong at junctions, it's not down to poor driver training. It's not down to the amount of time drivers spend looking for bikes on increasingly busy roads. It's not in-car distractions like mobile phones, because these crashes have always happened. They've happened in the same way, they've happened in the same places, and they've happened in almost exactly the same proportion as all crashes on motorcycles. And it's not got better either. So, you know, there have been lots of changes to the way cars are built, the way drivers drive, but the crash simply hasn't changed. It's human error. Mrs. Cook was attentive, she was concentrating, she just wasn't looking for the right vehicle in the right place at the right moment. She was focused on the fire engine, almost certainly not expecting to encounter a motorcycle. When it all came together, she unfortunately missed seeing the bike being ridden by Mr. Wilson, with the consequences for the rider. Now, despite everything I've said here, many riders will still say that drivers should try harder. We've had sort of look twice for bikes as a recent campaign. Others will say that if the judge had been more harsh, handed out a tougher sentence to the driver, she got a 12-month ban and a £350 fine, it would act as a deterrent. Motorcycle Action Group have been banging on about this for years. It won't. Really, it's down to us to look after ourselves, and it's down to us to know what we can do about developing SMIDSI. We have to see the situation as it is developing, and all we have to really remember is that we may not be seen. We have to actively expect a driver not to see us, even when we can see that car quite clearly. So think about what we can do. Change position, get further away from the turning vehicle. That movement alone might be enough to attract the driver's attention. Sound the horn. That might stop them in their tracks as they start to move. Slow down. You will have more time. The driver will have more time. Evasive action will be easier. And that just because that TV advert got it right, we are very hard to see, but we're dead easy to hurt. We ought to be reversing the think bike saying and using one for ourselves. Biker think. Sorry, been a long explanation, but I really think this covers a very important point. And I'll come back to it as well next week, because the judge said something about lights, which I think was interesting too. So very interesting, I think, end to the show there today, and a throwback to that safety video from 50 years ago. I hope you found it interesting. As I say, it's been a bit of a long show today, but let me know your thoughts. I'm always interested in what people have to hear. Feedback is important to me, and everybody else can read it, of course, which means other people can get a different perspective. But I hope that has thrown some insight into a slightly unusual SMIDSI crash. Right, okay, if you are out there on your bikes today, of course, do enjoy your ride, and thank you for looking in, and hopefully see you on the next show. But for the moment, make sure that you stay shiny side up.